Renault Xavier, A Wizard's Tale by Nomad. Performed by the mic voice module for text-to-speech conversion, otherwise known as Moon Man. My name is Renault Xavier II, born to Charles and Jessica Xavier, on the year of the Dark Portal's opening. I was born into a long lineage of Xaviers in power. All of them were just, wise and righteous, or so I was told. I may be somewhat young, but looking back on where I've been, what I've seen, what pains I've endured, and most importantly what I've done, it feels like I've lingered a lifetime on this war-torn realm. In my days I've had family, yet less so than others. A protective older sister, a younger half-brother, who, in the end proved a truer Xavier than even I, an uncle, who in retrospect, wished only good for me, and a myriad of far-flung cousins. I had to love, one fairer and truer than even the grandest gallant tales of old. Each of them, to me, was a fire keeping me going, ushering forward. However, now not a single fire remains, squelched one by war, tragedy, and even my own hand. I've held many things to my heart, deeper yet to my soul, and most often nearest to sin over all else. People, places, things. That which I clutch hardest always seems to burn away the quickest, lost to the sands of time, either by a simple sleight of judgment, or worse yet wrought by my own errant, malicious, greedy or foolish agendas. My place on his wrath, both past, present, and in our chaotic, no doubt death-addled future has proven itself one of the greater mysteries I've mulled over in life, as well as one of the most terrifying. My parents were joyed to see me into the world, yet their reasons elicited a complexity in our family. I was, in my father's words, his prodigy regardless of my older sister's wishes. She was eldest, but due both in part to her gender and her rebellious nature, my father saw her fit only to be raised and married off to another prominent family. Even if I was his favored child, in my youngest days I was a rather dainty lad, frailer than the next. My sister took me under her wing and shielded me from the colder truths of the world, our nation, and our house for as long as she could muster. She held those truths on her shoulders alone and shielded me from all foes, even our own house. We went to and fro, exploring the farmlands, visiting Duskhaven, and having a jolly time. When I was 6 I got my first inkling of said the aforementioned truths, a deep, dark terror eating at my young heart as I realized the malicious intent my father wrought upon my mother, all the while my sister turning my gaze. That was 22 years ago, yet I remember the palpable sinking feeling in my gut as if it were yesterday. Sometime not long after, another abnormality bled through into my otherwise merry childhood, the inherent arcane aptitude of a sorcerer. My father had me tested proper, revealing my natural talent. My grandfather, whom I never met, was a grand sorcerer, and the tales of him I was regaled and made my heart soar off to mythical plains of wonder and arcane mystery. I was fated for Dalaran. In time I said my goodbyes, not for good, no, as I'd be returning from Dalaran regularly to visit my kin. With my closest family far too busy with their political agenda and other business dealings, my uncle was tasked with escorting me to the fabled Mage City. I was taken aback by the wonders I beheld, bursting with joy and at the same time fear. All around me I saw hardened men of knowledge and valor, a city of gifted minds led by Antonius himself, a man of legend. I was amazed, but frightened, my mind drawn to whether or not I'd be so great in my later years, something I look back on often. It took me some months to adjust to the rigid, disciplined life of a young Dalaran apprentice, my tutorship being under a plethora of strict, seasoned magi. I felt a small tint of rebellion broiling up, stoked only ever so slightly, my eyes occasionally wandering to unsavory folk who lingered in dark corners. I wondered upon many a night why my instructors warned me of the sewer's dangers. I believed not their claims of snapping crocolisks. No, something else must have lied within, something I thirsted for merely due to its forbidden nature. Under a year after arriving in Dalaran I received news which would shatter my world, and in the wake of it forge me anew with a vigor, for better or worse. The grey main wall had closed, shutting off all those who wished entry, Gilnean kinsmen, or otherwise. My family had shut me out, left me stranded, and abandoned me. That was the only thought I could muster, and for the longest time it ate away at me like a rock borer through stone. My mettle as a sorcerer was forged and tested time and time again, the building blocks of a great wizard laid out and built upon like a rigid, unwavering tower. Over the next 10 years much changed. I had formed a ring of good friends, most of which rebels, those who often lingered in the underbelly, using drugs and stirring trouble. My best friend of all was a high elf named Mokfer, a young elf, who formed a troublesome duo with I. We conjured up all sorts of shenanigans, mostly light-hearted at first, but later we delved into a scant few darker things. Over time I began forsaking my studies more and more, treading back paths with a crew of rough-and-tumble wizards, organizing gambling rings and violet back alleys. We were all that, and that's all that mattered. My uncle always sought to discipline me in the absence of my parents, but we squabbled so often that we barely visited each other. I was in a bad way, or rather, I put myself in a bad way. As my trading progressed, I was trusted less and less, given tasks befitting students' years below myself. A loose cannon, I was told. A wild card of sorts just waiting to flip a spell and get someone killed. By 17 I was still considered an apprentice by most. A growing frustration urged me, compounded further by a stoked curiosity. A wanderlust. I wanted to see beyond the violet towers, to delve into deep dungeons, and forge my own legend as a hero. As a man of dollar, and I saw that prospective future slowly slipping away, my reputation degrading. I let my wanderlust take hold, and soon enough, along with Muckfer and some other friends, we set a course for adventure. The only word I received from my uncle was a notice informing me I was voided from his will. I thought on visiting him, trying to make him understand, but I knew he'd speak only of how I'd squandered my life. And so I left Dalaran behind, and with it my uncle's wealth and home. Most of our party went our separate ways in time, except Muckfer and I. We brought a third into our fold, Lexolus. So there I was, a scrawny illusionist and a hedge mage up against the world with 2 elves. Our trio traveled the span of the northern eastern kingdoms, from Arati to Stratholme, and even near to Kelthalis. To this day I wonder what it would be like to peer into the elven homeland. Life was good for a time. There were flocks of no-brained yokels in each town, just waiting to be scammed, easy prey for an illusionist. In Dalaran people were much more weary, and magically seasoned. You'd be found, reprimanded, and possibly exiled. However, here I lined my pockets with others' ignorance. I dined well, and wasted away my nights in brothels with good company. My quest to solidify myself as a hero of legend would have to wait. I assured myself, another day. Soon enough we caught wind of a bounty put on an orc known as Thrall. At the time we thought it just a lowly bounty waiting to be coined. We set out, scouring the lands for any sign of the beast. Yet our quest was cut short when we followed a lead to a small, dark cave. Within was a dead wizard, a tome, and an orb. I looted the staff, Lexolus began reading the tome, and Muckfer coveted the artifact. We each left that cave with something. To Lexolus, a debilitating addiction to vile magic; to Muckfer, a deep-seated, arcane power-induced madness; and to me, a fright I would not soon forget. My closest comrades were becoming gnarled. Lexolus began trifling with FEL magic, provoking terrible powers from beyond. Muckfer delved deeply into the power of the orb, becoming a beacon of arcane as his mind crumbled. I was worried and shaken, and so I left. I fancied traveling the kingdoms, and so I did. Cool Tirasere smelled of open sea and boundless dreams, with massive ships warranting song and praise. The dwarven mountain home of Ironforge was a marvel, halls of drink and metal eliciting endless, drunken parties with merriment abound. The peaks of the Eyrie were mighty, and though the Wild Hammer held no grand halls, they were fond of good ale just the same. Stratholme's chefs created meals fit for kings, and nearly tempted me to settle. It's good I did not. Stormwind's trade district was bustling with traders from across the globe, trinkets from far-flung corners of Azeroth strung up in exotic displays. I duck into lesser settlements from time to time to refill my coffers, passing off grand, golden jewelry, in truth tarnished and warped by magic. I took on very little quests in this time, busying myself with forgetting my past and living in the moment. Eventually, however, I was stricken with a remorse. I began to see just how little I'd done, and just how far I'd strayed from my original prospects. I began my trip home, knowing not what I'd do when I'd get there. I caught wind of terrible rumors. Mysterious deaths and dark magic were on the rise. Supposedly, some sort of evil beginning to grip the world. I remember what happened next very clearly, for it was, and forever shall be, the most terrible sight I'd ever witnessed. Coincidentally, just as Dalaran came into view, its grand towers began crumbling, countless lives extinguished as rumor became reality, before my very eyes. If I'd arrived a day earlier, I'd have been dead with them, I thought. I was lucky, I thought. That notion soon changed, as I realized undead were rampant, washing over the lands. A plague of death in its own right. Most of Lord Arryn had already been engulfed, but I joined the remaining fight nonetheless. I had thought first to go to my uncle's estate in Hillsbrad, but I got word he had left to Stratholme on business a month prior. Word was that Stratholme had fallen some time ago, But regardless, I set out to find him. I wasn't prepared for such horrors, and nearly died several times, in some situations more so a liability than an asset. I didn't even make it close to the city. The world I had known, the home I had known, Hillsbrad, Dalaran, it was all crumbling, and my uncle was beyond reach, assuming he was even still alive. Time passed as the Third War raged on, and I slowly became numb. I don't know why I did what I did next. Maybe it was a brief glimpse of insanity, or just a fear drilled into my soul by the things I'd witnessed in such a short span. I sought to become a necromancer, to join the winning side, I figured in a brief moment, trying to veil the madness with a full rationality. I had located a necromancer departed from the main risen forces, and approached, meaning to submit. At the last moment, however, my fear drove me to take yet another turn, and I fled. I ran with all my strength, yet the necromancer was madder than I fled into a burnt ruin, and was met with a pair of glowing emerald eyes. I jumped in fright, alerting my chasers, to which the burning eyes lashed out, slaying them with smoldering fire. It was a blood elf from the newly forged Centauri nation. Laraway, I'd learned her name, was traveling southward from her gnarled home of Kelthalis. She belittled me for my foolishness. Although we only crossed paths briefly then, she taught me a valuable lesson. Delusion and deception could only bring me so far. Her flames were strong, stronger than even my evocation tutor in Dalaran. There I was, with no family, no friends, and no money. I owned only the robes on my back, my tattered hat, my staff, and my sword. I was scrawny, hungry, alone, and afraid. I had lost everything. It was then I first felt it, truly. That gaping hole inside, as if a part of my soul had been stripped away. I was stubborn yet, however, and with nothing else on my mind I began southward. The emerald-eyed elf called me weak, and I was going to prove her wrong. In the face of everything, I had failed. I failed my uncle, my professors, and even my two closest friends. There would be one. At least one person in this world who'd see me in a better light, a victorious light which I sought with a divine fervor. Laraway. I set off to the Southlands in search of the wayward elf, scraping up what coin I could as I went. I improved my evocation in what glimpses of downtime I'd found, and rested not a moment longer than was necessary. It was a trialing time, but I pushed on nonetheless. There I was, at the peak of a rocky, molten hill in the burning steppes. I'd nearly been caught by roaming black rock parties several times, but I'd made it. I'd made it to the home of the rumored Flame Witch. Trekking the treacherous slope upward, I avoided several arcane traps, maneuvering carefully. As I reached the top, I saw her, the same elf from well over a year past. There was a fire in my eyes, as I challenged her, a duel I'd proposed in a bout of haste. Our duel lasted some time. She threw molten flames and mighty pyroblasts, but more times, and not I was truly elsewhere, her attacks washing away mere illusions. My skills weren't enough, however, and she eventually caught me, her attack nearly ending me on the spot. Ultimately she spared me, offering me a delicate hand, as if to aid me. As I took her hand I felt the remainder of my mana wrenched from my body in a single moment, a white-hot pain washing over my senses. I lied there, clutching at my front weakly, and fidgeting. A few moments later I forced myself to kneel, shambling toward her, totally defeated. I begged her to impart her knowledge, to forge me into a weapon, and grant me her boon of fire. I was nothing more than a child in her eyes, and she reduced me to just that. Less than a week and I was covered in burnt, in constant pain, sleeping on the cold ground through terrible, restless nights, and training for hours and hours on end. Whenever I failed thrice at any one task, in any one lesson, my mana was wrenched from me. The worst part was that I was to willingly give it an admittance of my failure, or face even worse consequence. In that week span I was drained at least a dozen times. She was a cruel, insane woman, I thought at first, and I contemplated quitting, and leaving many a time. However, it was all I had. She was all I had, my teacher, and my tormentor. The days turned to weeks, and then to months, time rolling on. Eventually she softened up somewhat, still holding a firm grip over my trading, and keeping her harsh punishments in the face of my failures. I learned more in the span of 2 years than I had in 10 at Dalaran. Under Laraway I was transformed. There was a malicious intent in me I'd seen only scarcely prior. More than once I'd enjoyed slowly roasting a black rock orc, or a lone dark iron. It was the first time I'd ever taken pleasure in killing, something I tried my hardest not to admit. My pyromancy was honed greatly, and my affinity for evocation overall spiked sharply. I could throw a firebolt prior, perhaps, but now I could hurl a force of molten fury, melting away most anything, or so I thought. I set off eventually, leaving the steps behind, but not the innate destructive power instilled in me by my training. The world had survived the Third War, but not without great consequence. Everything had changed, I found. A new horde had risen, and a new alliance. My travels soon ushered me further south, towards Stormwind. On my way I'd done a handful of quests, testing my mettle, yet nothing too grand. I eventually reached the city, thinking back on my prior visit with a smirk. I quickly made a life for myself, as an adventurer of sorts, minus the cunning and the deception of times past. I slew local bandits and various ilk alike, doing what must be done in the king's name. For a short time I was as I envisioned myself, as a child. A man of strength. One fateful night, however, I entered an unsavory bar in a decrepit back alley. It was there I met one of the most important people in my entire life. Jettison Xavier. A cousin under Uncle Yebediah, who'd moved to Redridge sometime before the walls closing. Jet, I'd find, was a rather shady sort, and we quickly came to know each other over the coming weeks. I was so convinced I was alone prior. Hitting up the bars with Jet rekindled my spirits greatly, but in time I'd come to see his darker side. He was a kingpin of sorts, organizing a smuggling operation which trafficked high-profile, illegal magical goods through Alliance lands, Stormwind lands more often than not. The organization was known as the Xavier Family Estate. He'd worked with Defius before, as well as other lowly gangs, enlisting the aid of malevolent forces in his business. I was reviled at first, but soon I came to realize the great wealth he'd amassed, and the loyalty of his men. No Xavier left behind was their motto. Each of them was an Xavier in spirit, Jet told me he said. It just seemed fitting, naming them how he did, noting how stubborn and relentless our house had always been in business affairs. I had a lot to think on. In time I joined my cousin, unlocking yet another innate skill within. I was always good at conning, coining off simpletons' ignorance, but now I was smuggling, killing, and interrogating. I was good at being bad. It was a terrible truth, but truth nonetheless. It felt natural to me, and better yet I was at my cousin's side. A rival business known as the Lionhearts threatened to move in on our corner of the market, harassing us and interrupting our affairs. Jet wouldn't stand for it, and neither would I. After a while an all-out underground war broke out, raising the suspicions of the Watch, slowly but surely eliciting the attention of SI-7. We raided their storehouses several times, and them ours. I remember vividly one night in Ironforge, stowed away in a dark corner, in some safe house, sitting in comfortable silence with a woman I happened to fancy at the time. There was a knock at the door, and moments later gunshots rang out. It was utter chaos. We'd lost several men, and nearly ourselves. It only grew worse from there. Soon enough we heard word the Lionhearts had disbanded, rumblings of SI-7 poking around spreading quickly. I remember what happened next with utter clarity. It was night. Myself, Jettison, and both our dates were sitting at the docks, watching a fireworks display. We were guarded by our most trusted advisor, Samuel. He warned us just in time, yelling out as two SI-7 emerged from the crowd. They nearly cuffed us, but we jumped into the waters. We escaped. How exactly, I'll never know. We laid low for a time, our growing infamy spreading like wildfire. In that time, however, we recruited, refilling our ranks in deep shadows, daring only to linger in the blackest of valleys. Some time after word of the dark portal's reopening reached us, a mysterious man came into our fold, known only as Kyle. He had taste for mana dust and thistle, something we shared soon enough. We had a lot of spare time, then. After Learways trading I was much less scrawny, and more robust, albeit more grotesque, as well from my many burns. Now I'd been fortifying myself further, splitting my time between building myself and furthering my wizardly studies. A gangster needed a certain look, and I lacked that at first. Jettison and myself began arguing over the direction we'd go, into what business we'd lead the Xaviers, and when he'd come out of hiding. He had to remind me several times I was his subordinate, and things got rough. As the gruesome war in Northrend broke out, Stormwind's great minds were elsewhere, and so we emerged from hiding. We began working again, regardless of Kyle's brief absence, as he left to Northrend. We even set up a shop in Old Town, a dust production facility cleverly veiled as an alchemical laboratory. We had runners at the bottom of our hierarchy peddling goods, and higher-ups moving high-profile items across sensitive borders. Our income was boosted near tenfold, and 2 more true-blooded Xavier joined us: Landarin, a hearty man with a taste for rum and fine women, and Eero, a curse-afflicted lad with a taste for demon binding. We'd sprung land from 2 guards, actually, who'd been dragging him from Elwyn to the stockades. Not an easy feat by any means. Life was good again. However, something was amiss. A sweet high elven thing had my cousin at her beck and will, totally encompassed and swayed. She slowly tugged him away from us. First they were engaged to be married, then soon they announced she was pregnant. I coveted what he had, in a way, even if I'd never admit it. She held an almost divine elegance, as most elves did, and I was still moving from woman to woman, charming whoever I cared to glance at. I saw it coming months before, yet it didn't prepare me for it. Jet was quitting, taking his cut, and leaving me in charge. One man, a higher-up, yet still under me at the time, objected to my leadership. He disappeared in the night. As leader of the estate, I first promoted unity and brotherhood, bolstering the notion of no Xavier left behind. Soon after, I bolstered our business, increasing production and distribution. I was getting greedy and fast, yet I had an amazing mind for it, evading the law and working outside of it. I was taking pinches of dust more and more often, my mind always racing with thoughts, my heart always pounding with fervor. I was living fast and loose, and it was showing. Kyle returned to us, riding an old, rusted machine. We'd roll around the town, stirring up bar fights, and pestering folk, like teenagers, when our hands weren't full. It was a grand time, but with rise must come fall. I began more closely associating with the remnants of the Defias, overseeing joint operations between our parties. We began smuggling weapons, as well as other items beyond our normal repertoire. The final straw, however, was when we began setting up false tolls along scarcely used roads in Elwyn, robbing people of their coin. The moment word of it spread, SI7's eyes were upon us, knowing very well the Xaviers had been rekindled. Meanwhile, during a high-risk, joint operation, we crossed the Defias, cutting their pay. We thought it would be of little consequence, as the Defias had all but faded. A wide-scale assault on all our assets was suddenly mounted, Stormwind intelligence descending on us like rabid hounds, in a coordinated strike. Very few of us managed to evade them, among us Kyle, Landarin, Sam, and some others. Our business was finished. I had become incognito when I met her. Sarah, a young thing, innocent and beautiful. She'd wooed me without saying a word. She had a fire in her heart, I'd find out later, buried beneath those gentle looks. She was just as stubborn as I, and we were perfect for each other. It was a cliché plucked straight from romantic stories of old, I tell you. But it was real. When she found out about the things I'd done, the business I'd been so deeply involved in, I thought for sure she'd turn tail. However, she saw past it, or so she said. There was a hero yet in me, she assured me, and for the first time in a long few months I smiled, an amazing feeling washing over me. I felt whole in her presence. In time we departed, moving far away from Stormwind's gaze to my uncle's old estate, having survived the Third War and been left to me in his death. We lived in peace for a time, hearing scant news of war in Northrend coming to a close, the crusade marching on the Lich King's fortress. A familiar face arrived at our doorstep. It was Eero. At first I thought it a pleasant visit, but he had a proposal. He was going to rekindle our smuggling ring, and he wanted me at his side. I declined, obviously, and things grew quiet. In the coming days, however, strange happenings began. We'd awakened to a window being smashed, or something in the yard being toppled. I soon realized Eero was bent on me joining him. He saw me as integral, unfortunately. I was worried and caught in a storm of anxiety. I had long since quit pinching dust, but in a moment of weakness I raided the cellar for a drink as Sarah was out, and when she returned we'd had an argument. The entire night was blurry, but I know we got into it fierce, and somewhere along the line the house was set ablaze with her inside. The next thing I remember was morning, birds chirping in my ear. I opened my eyes to a smoking ruin. I rummaged through the debris for hours, my hands bleeding, and my muscles aching, but couldn't find her. I killed her. There was no doubt about it, I was driven to the bottle by Eero, and I killed her. I bandaged myself, salvaged what I could, and set off for Eero's camp. I remember very clearly what happened next. I weaved illusion and infiltrated them. Then in the night I sprung an ambush, setting their tents ablaze. I scorched every one of them alive, and relished in their screams. Each resounding cry of anguish filled the growing void in me with a brief darkness, and in the wake of it I stared down Eero. We fought tooth and nail, tome and spell, throwing everything we had at each other. In the end I was the victor, and I ran him through with my sword. I stared into his eyes as he faded, then cast him aside, as if I was some ruthless monster. I sat there among the charred bodies for hours, just sitting and idling blankly. I pondered ending myself there, but one thought kept me going. My brother. One day as I was slinking through the trade district, firmly veiled as to hide my identity, I heard a loud rumble. A massive dragon came crashing down, obliterating an entire district of the city. I was taken aback. When I heard word that the Lich King was dead, I was so sure the world would see some reprieve, yet Deathwing returned nonetheless. The moment we'd heard of the invasion of Gilneas and the refugees in Darnassus, Lenderin, Kyle, and even Jet set off with a handful of other stranded Gilneans to find our long-lost families. We scoured Darnassus, the camps, everywhere. Some in our party were lucky, but not us. There were no Xaviers to be found here, nor there. And so us three hatched a suicidal plan. We hired an afflicted Gilnean mage to weave us a portal nearer to Duskhaven. He warned us that he wasn't sure the town even survived the cataclysm. We went regardless. I was stricken with both nostalgia and disgust at once. There were remains strewn out over the road, and dark, sickly howls shooting from the wall in the distance. We trekked the road for a time, and soon we beheld a crushing sight. Duskhaven was swept beneath the waves long before our arrival, and with our old estate grounds. We delved into the waters regardless, trying to dredge up any recognizable bodies, desperately seeking answers as to where our house's remnants had gone. We found something odd. Then, a piece of evidence. It turned out the entire time we'd had another Xavier right beside us, Renault Xavier. A bastard son under my father, born in secrecy, and shipped off to the Outland expedition with his mother. My best friend was also my brother, which did well to lift my spirits in such a trying time. We took refuge in an abandoned house as dusk settled, the piercing howls more and more constant. They grew closer, even as time went on, and we got little sleep. I awoke in the middle of the night, perturbed. There, I was it. Two glowing, golden eyes staring in the window. Then, two more, and again. We fortified the house in a rush, but soon enough we were besieged. It was a small group, thankfully, and we felled them. Lunderine, however, was bitten. We hunkered down, panicking. We were fools to tread there, and we cursed our own stupidity. We tied Land up, but by morning Land had turned. He burst from his bindings and came at us, but I managed to subdue him with magic. I didn't want to risk my own shitty portal work at first, but now we had no options. I opened a rift at Darnassus. Yet, we exited in Teldrassil. We made our way to the city nonetheless, and passed him over to the Night Elves. From there we all split ways, all but me and Kyle. I invented an alias. I became Albertrite, a new man for a new dawn. Kyle refused to use an alias. He told me there was pride yet to be an Xavier. I thought him a fool asking to be caught and hung. We lingered in bars, inns, and backwater towns, living off the bottle, and stirring up trouble, yet again. However, I'd gotten a taste of something I had before. Something I wasn't ready to give up again. Wealth and power lured me, and so I set off to Booty Bay, and established Right Trading Co. I brought on a team of ruthless mercenaries and cutthroats, among them most prominently Sarah, an afflicted Gilnean, whose preferred style of combat was wrenching out people's throats with her teeth. Bendrick, a crackshot rifleman of Stormwind. Then finally Dalen Hia, an odd sort of blood elf, disfigured, and muscular, and utterly merciless. I left my second-in-command Grooks in charge for a time, and departed with my warriors in tow. I'd heard rumors of a shattered amulet of power able to boost spellcraft, and so my latest quest was forged. We delved deeply into tombs, ruins, and darker places, assembling each shard. In one final act I cast them together, reforging the item with a resounding boom. As I brought it upon my neck I could feel the bolstered arcane flowing through me. I don't know exactly how this came about, but what happened next was an oddity in its own right. I'd stricken a deal with the freewheeling Naga, a massive, hulking creature known as Xenia. Her tribe needed mass amounts of stone for masonry, and she offered great wealth in return, as well as some ancient arcane secrets. We had a conundrum, however. We lacked the proper contacts. I sent Grooks to establish them, as I and my cohort set out to salvage Trollish ruins, utilizing slave labor and armed guards to oversee the operation. We extracted what sturdy blocks we could, simultaneously fighting off a troll's risen minions. No one knew who I was trading with except me and Grooks, and I kept it that way. I made the first trade, and all the while I held a straight face. In truth, however, there was a pit in my stomach all the while. Being in Senior's presence instilled deep terror, which I did well to hide. Soon enough crooks pulled through, and we found a steady supply of stone from a company in the Northlands. We were raking in gold like it was nothing, but questions began to arise about my anonymous client. Regardless of my troubles, I found some temporary reprieve in nights at goblin brothels and bars. I soon found that despite the money, women, and power, that hole inside wouldn't never fill, remaining a constant reminder. Nightmares become more and more frequent, and my mind began to degrade. As our fruitful trade agreement prospered, I was given a glimpse into the deep vestiges of artifacts the Naga held. Sanya bestowed on me a ring encrusted with a black pearl. It was so large that to me it was a bracelet. It could boost my spell work, but the power within had way of corrupting me roughly. About the same time, I hired an auxiliary group of adventurers to delve into a tomb in the Northlands. I made sure Kyle was among them. They encountered echoes of the past, showing a medicine of our grandfather. He possessed a staff of great power which gnarled and corrupted him. Our father, Charles, had killed him in secrecy, ending his madness. He laid him and his staff to rest. They retrieved the staff per my order, and soon enough got word from Grills. Kyle was to deliver the item to me, and when he arrived I told him of my new life. He was wary of the items I'd obtained, but thankful for my hospitality. As the world was coming to an end in far-off lands, I was sitting pretty with my brother at my side. My security faltered before long. I got word of SI-7 poking around, drawing ever nearer to our operations. Ever nearer to the truth. Albert Wright was a veil. As dark settled, I acted quickly, dissolving the company and its assets. I set the evidence ablaze and disappeared in a single night. An amazing feat of cowardice. I trekked carefully to Elwyn, mulling over a new name. As I went, I hid away my riches in various, magically protected stashes all across Stormwind's lands. Soon enough I was Arthur McGregor, a humble farmhand. I thought I could bury everything deep down and start anew, start somewhere humble, and make a real life. It didn't last a month before I packed my things and left with Kyle, dropping all our coin on an old cart. We set off, adventure-bound. We went to and fro, fighting off whatever ailed us, facing the world with our chins up and chests out. It was just us for a while, a dynamic duo worthy of history. However, most of our journey composed of getting radars drunk or high on thistle, getting into ridiculous shenanigans. Our paths soon crossed with Renault Xavier, a cousin on my mother's side. We trekked together, us three, but soon Wall urged me to leave with him and take up mercenary work. I knew it paid well, but I hadn't the incentive prior. We did, and we soon found ourselves hired by an old hag to assault a crypt, working alongside an old known as Ren. Her abode was laden with living pumpkins, the woman no doubt witch. Deeper into her crypt lied a terrible evil. Demons. As we went along slaying the fiends, I harvested their blood in vials, assuring my cousin they would fetch a hefty price on backwater markets. However, I had an ulterior motive. I'd been spiking my mana potions with demon's blood for some time in secret, the stem of my increasingly volatile nature. We fought them back. Yet, instead of coin, we each received a slice of pumpkin pie. I scoffed at first, growing angry. Yet this was no ordinary food. As I bit into it, I felt myself invigorated, my spell-casting capabilities permanently increased by a small margin. It would do. Me and Wallen moved on, trekking north to the hinterlands, heeding the alliance call to arms. We slew many a troll, witherbark, and horde alike. We took on a variety of tasks, from aiding the front lines, defending bunkers, investigating, and clearing out used ends. It was a truly gruesome effort, death rampant, various battles fought under the hard patter of rain with screams of agony resounding. Beyond that episode of my life, I parted ways with Wallen, seeking a teacher in hemomancy. I wished to cheat death and find a way to heal myself in the wake of battle. My search led me to Nicholas, then to Fashgor, a sickly necromancer. I made a pact to serve him in exchange for the secrets of blood magic, and I soon acted as an envoy to recruit the necromancer Dirge into Fashgor's forces. As a reward for my service, Fashgor toted a young, helpless woman in front of me, slitting her throat. She was to be the source of blood for our training. I kept a straight face, as I had in the past, yet inside I felt myself reeling. I fled soon after, informing the local Lord Marcus Mirosi of the great danger afoot before washing my hands of it. I went back to the only thing I knew, lingering with my brother, and our old, creaky cart. He saw it in me, the change the demon blood had wrought upon my soul. I was nearer to sin now, a malice held abreast. We argued, going back and forth. Kyle suddenly collapsed, however. In a day's time he didn't awake. He was in a coma, no doubt, the arcane that wrought his own form having degenerated him to the point of no return. With Gilento I saddled up the horses and set off toward the dark portal, thinking I could find someone from his past who would impart a miracle and heal him. As we trekked the swamp of sorrows, however, a lone, brown orc appeared. He offered his aid, and I was too deeply in a haze to refuse. He beckoned the spirits and purged Kyle of the deepest bastions of taint hidden deep within Kyle's subconscious. He did the same to me, and I found my mind locked in a battle against the corruption gripping me, with the orc by my side. I saw deep, terrible things, memories of Sarah, of my father, my mother, and my sister. All the people I'd held dear flashed before my eyes, but I prevailed, and so did Kyle. The orc mended us and disappeared, and so it was. I told my brother I'd decided something. I decided to clear our family name, or die trying. Truly, I wished more the latter than the former, as I was wrought with guilt, and so I was reckless in the coming months. We ran into Nicholas, and he offered to share his home, as we had none. We took up residence in the Thornton Cave in Westfall. I answered a call to arms, in aiding Lieutenant Horatio Lane in uncovering a dastardly truth. Weeks rolled by, I and my adventurous cohorts delving deeper into the mystery surrounding the dusty plains. By this time I was an accomplished swordsman, and began fancying myself a battle mage of sorts. My evocation had descended, and my conjuration improved as well, as I summoned mighty elementals to aid me at the peak of the conflict. The Defius showed itself, usurping Sentinel Hill, in a deathly display. I and my cohorts quickly fled to Stormwind, and were granted a personal audience with King Varian Rin himself to debrief him on the situation. My heart sank. I was going to be caught and hung, surely. Yet, in a way I'd achieved the heroism I'd striven for so many years. However, they saw only Arthur McGregor, and Arthur the Red, a hero who'd receive a staff of House Rin plucked straight from their royal coffers, a hero who'd shake his king's hand. Renault Xavier was merely a crook whom withered away into obscurity. I was relieved, saddened, and frustrated all at once. In the wake of the conflict in Westfall, I began searching fervently for another battle. While searching for a necromancer, I encountered something odd. An order of Sun Knights composed of human and elf alike, totally departed from the foreign Sunwalker order. Malin was their chapter master, and he took me on as an auxiliary. I had also gathered a new circle of friends and comrades, among them most prominently Admure the Bastard, Atalis the Mage Priest, Leaf the Swift, Morgauza the Sly, Isabella the Strong, Shrike the Traitor, and Nasser the Kind. At the Sun Knight's side, I, and even Isabella at times, hunted the necromancer furiously, straying from our cause only to fell other assorted evildoers. This went on for a time, Mullen calling me to arms nearly every day, my fatigue beginning to mount, and my mind beginning to falter from the constant duress. We finally found some rest, however, as Winter's Veil rolled in, snow building over village, plain, and down like. Malin and Kyle became good friends, and after Winter's Veil dinner Kyle gifted me a peculiar wand. I thought nothing of it beyond a simple gift, knowing not the item's true purpose, which would unveil itself later. Wintertime had a certain way of provoking deep thought in me, and I often found myself pondering. Had I been doing good for the sake of good, or for myself, merely to fill the dark pit inside so long exacerbated by my tumultuous life? There were little answers to be found. The cold still nipped at our heels, but the festivities had long since ended. I'd gotten an inkling that SI-7 had been tracking me, dark shadows looming in my wake. Rather than flee, however, I pushed on, taking on a contract from a prominent local marshal. I and whatever party I could gather were to work against a bandit hive hidden somewhere in Elwyn. With a damned leaf at my back, we trekked to a local farm, following rumblings of trouble brewing. We managed to run through several bandits, but in the end they took a hostage in hand, intending to slip away lest they slit her throat. It made a move, yet in his folly ran through the hostage, rather than her captor. In a moment of conjoined shock they took another captive, redoubling their warnings. They slipped away, and as my young cohorts collapsed in terror I set off after them. I weaved an illusion, making myself out to be one of their missing comrades. Joining their vile ranks I soon sprung my trap, slaying one, and capturing the other. I sent the farmhand back, then interrogated the bandit using pyromancy and good old-fashioned steel. It took convincing, but he finally alluded to their hideout in Fargo Deep Mine. I assembled a new, redoubled group with Morgauza and some others at my side, advancing on the stronghold a day later. We fought with everything we had, cutting down the hideout's denizens mercilessly. In the end, however, there were far too many. I looked back to Morehausa and waved, a way of saying farewell. In that moment my life flashed before my eyes, thinking further to the dark afterlife I'd likely doomed myself to. I accepted my fate, yet, as I mounted a massive feat of evocation I once thought would destroy me, I survived by some nigh miracle. I obliterated a mob of gangly lowlifes, the spell's high tier racking my body severely. SI-7 suddenly descended in a gruesome advance, mopping up the rest, as I blacked out. I awoke in the Cathedral of Lightenham in Spain, he priests hard at work mending my broken body. I lied there, tossing and struggling, white-hot agony washing over me as my skin was knit together and my bones set right. In the wake of it I remained strewn out over the floor, languid and still as Morehausa looked on. I was so ready to die, so ready to face my eternal punishment, and leave Azeroth, yet fate has an odd way of things. A letter was brought to my side, then, and, as I unfurled it my eyes went wide. It addressed Renault Xavier. Surely, I was caught. As I read on I found I wasn't wrong. Yet, the letter's contents were vastly different than I'd first gauged. I was pardoned for valiant defense of Westfall, Elwyn, Duskwood, and the Alliance's holdings. I know not who recognized me, whether it was the Marshal, or if SI-7 had merely caught up to me and saw fit to observe my good deeds, but I was now a free man regardless. I began laughing, to chuckle at first, then I became hysterical. Morehausa inquired, and as my laughter died down I introduced myself to her in full truth as Renault Xavier of Stormwind. I'd done so much good, spared so many lives, and suffered so much for my crimes. Yet, even as the law saw me fit to walk a free man I, inside, felt no greater than the criminal I was years past. I thought being redeemed would help me move on, let go, and embrace the hero I thought myself to be so long ago. No such luck. I was still Renault Xavier. I had still killed and swindled for greed. I had still let my family down, and I had still killed the one person who set my heart alight. I was no longer angry, now more so sullen. A great depression gripped me, and each night I slept less and less. Rather than salvation I was crumbling, and I knew it. The only thing which kept me going in months past was fighting for causes greater than myself. I was a bad man, yet a bad man can still fight for something good, and try to leave the world better off than if he was never born. I contemplated leaving my new friends behind and leaving to the front lines in the war on Deathwing. Yet my next battle would be much closer. I would not need to leave to the Twilight Highlands to find trouble. Leaf and I stumbled upon an elf, one day. Niev. She was scarred, dark runes having been etched in her skin, before being dumped in Elwyn carelessly. I felt a hint of remorse. No one deserved such a fate, and yet it wasn't my business. Even with my reservations, however, Leaf urged me to help her, and see Niev return to Ashenvale. Wet set off for Booty Bay, trekking through Duskwood, and then into the northern reaches of Stranglethorn. We set up camp, but in the night Leaf and I were recalled to Duskwood to aid in some emergency. I left a communication stone and a cloak to Niev before we departed, and we were off. Some hours later I received a message through the stone's power, a dire one. Niev was assailed and captured, or so it seemed. Had I already failed in my task? Had I really faltered so easily? We rushed back to search for her, and did find her. But with her was a night elf warden, a fear-inspiring sight. The warden nearly struck me down for daring to cast magic in her presence, a foolish choice. Moving on from that I soon realized the direness of the situation. A powerful, dark force was chasing Niev, the warden explained. For a moment I thought to leave Niev to the warden, but I had sworn to see her to Ashenvale. I insisted on safeguarding her, and ushering forth with urgent swiftness. The warden reluctantly agreed, and departed. I opened a portal, intending to tear a rift to Ashenvale. Yet my portal work was shoddy at best, and my party landed in Fellwood. We trekked south, meeting up with protectors of nature, Wildheart and Eldergreen. They both struck a certain wonder in our hearts, massive druidic creatures of legend. We fended off more than one satyr ambush, fighting our way southward. We reached Ashenvale, finally, and lingered for a time, as he waited for the warden to arrive and give us further order. We took in the sights and sounds of the ancient, mythical forest. Regardless of the harsh looks and glares the elves gave us, we weren't welcome, that was obvious, but we were there to aid Niev, and we weren't going to be chased off so easily. I needed a rest so desperately after fighting for so long, and in those scant few days I largely recovered from the harsh journey. Yet, soon enough the warden arrived, and we spoke solemnly. I swore an oath to safeguard Nef and hide her away from the forces seeking her, to lead her to some far-off nook in the eastern kingdoms where her pursuers would never think to look. It was an oath I did not take lightly. Soon we set off, my party and I, among us a good deal of friends as Ed, Leaf, Eth, Morg, and even Isa walked in tow. We trekked the mountains, then the plains, skirting around the horde, to arrive in Ratchet. We hitched a ride back to Booty Bay, and soon enough met up with yet another comrade, Jareth. We'd sat down for dinner in the unsavory Salty Sailor Tavern, when the one gifted by my dear brother suddenly came to life. It projected an image of him, as if in the flesh, and he explained he had to fight to face on his own. Ever since we were united years past I looked out for him as my younger brother. Yet now I trusted him. We both knew he'd been through enough to face whatever he'd need to, and so I left his business to him. Some time later the wand sprung to life again, this time an arcane construct springing forth from the affixed crystal. It urged me to leave to Stormwind to seek the Thumann's home. We hired griffins post-haste and flew off to the Grand City. Ducking through alleys and back streets we quickly made our way to Mullen's sister, Hayseekah's abode. There Kyle, Hayseekah, and Mullen lay, battered and injured, having suffered an attack from the aforementioned forces working against Kyle. Jess and Mel were breathing, but when I checked Kyle he was entirely still. The priests attempted resuscitating him, and then pronounced him dead. My entire world crumbled yet again. Kyle meant more to me than any of the far-flung comrades that came and went. He was my brother, both in arms and in house, regardless of how sullied our house had been, and how much we ourselves sullied it. I was given a moment alone to grieve, and withdrew my dagger. I would not suffer this world any longer. The construct sprung from the staff wand again, stopped my hand at the last moment. It urged me to return home, back to the estate I once shared with my love. On top of that I still held an oath, and so I intended to move forward. Malin suddenly interjected, blaming me for Kyle's demise, telling me I'd abandoned my brother in his darkest hour. He was right, in a way, yet I was enraged, so engulfed by grief I attacked him. We brawled, and the guards split us. That was the end of Mullen and I's friendship. I and my comrades, as well as the construct traveled pushed north toward our twin destinations. My uncle's Hillsbrad estate and an old, enchanted tomb Isabella sought for her own gain. We came upon the estate after an unnecessarily arduous journey. I couldn't bear the sight of it at first, and I nearly turned back. Ronald, however, pushed me towards the old, run-down ruin. The construct left at the front door, suddenly disappeared into some arcane, runic work inscribed upon the door. In a flash the truth of the scene was revealed, a reconstructed home rebuilt by Kyle's own hand months before his demise, something he did in secret. It was a late winter's veil present, and the most moving thing I'd ever seen in my days. Further yet was the cart, the same one we'd toted around like brotherly fools so long ago, having been lost to us before. I cried, something I hadn't done in years. Kyle suddenly appeared, revealing himself, clad in a rather nostalgic garb. It was something I'd expect him to wear years ago, but I cared not. We had a tomb to raid, and an adventure to look forward to, so I took my brother by the shoulder, and we went on. He stopped suddenly, however, unable to leave the premises of the estate. He was merely an arcane echo, a magical construct weaved from my brother's own hand. I knew from the very beginning, but just putting on a face and believing it for even a moment more comforted me greater than anything else could. I confessed and confided in him, a mere illusion of my late brother. I told him what I'd done, how I'd killed Sarah, and how I'd been torn up inside for years. He hugged me and told me he was proud of me despite it all, and that I was the truest Xavier he'd ever known. Tears streamed down my face, and in the wake of it all we had one last fist bump, saying our goodbyes. I told him I'd join him in time, somewhere far, far down the line. I'd let go. Something I'd struggled to do for years and years. I'd let go of the torment I was shouldering for so long, a truly epic feat, a great weight relinquished. We made camp at the foot of the tomb's entrance, my comrades and I. We began delving within every so often, slowly but surely chipping away the dungeon's many tricks and turns. In that time I felt myself drawn nearer to Isabella, a fellow kinsman of Gilneas. We became a thing of sorts in time, and we mulled over prospects of retaking her old estate, and I loved the coast of our besieged homeland. Her presence comforted me, yet a fear bore deep inside, something instilled by my previous loss. Was I genuine? Or was I merely trying to fill the hole Sarah had left in me? Regardless, progress on the tomb slowed, and our allies slowly emptied from the camp. On a particularly barren night I was approached by a blood elf. She claimed she was but a humble supplicant come to warn me of Nef's impending abduction. She said she was to aid me in reclaiming her once she was taken, as she held something against the same cult which took interest in her. I scoffed. Nef was safe under my protection, surely. How could a mere elf foretell such a happening? Such precognition was a madman's fancy. I warned the Centauri to leave, and leave she did. In the night we were descended upon, gagged only momentarily, as they whisked the night elf away from our grasp. I struggled with all my might, but I was battered unconscious. I awoke, my group now diminished. The Centauri returned, and revealed herself to be Salen, an ex-ranger bent on revenge. I sent Leaf back to Stormwind. This was not her fight, and I couldn't ask someone so young to trek such a narrow path. I took to Salen's path, and reluctantly pushed on with her, tracking the cult. For a time I thought they were Twilights, but Salen shed light on that, revealing they were a different kind of ilk. We gave chase with fervor, trekking the globe in a quest even more troublesome than the prior trials I'd faced. At every turn the cultists were one step ahead, as if they were leading us on, holding all the cards, as they played us like puppets. We tread through tricks and turns, winding paths, and steep mountains, seeking the cult and their supposed Hierophant, their leader. A broiling rage began building in me. The great strides I'd taken to reforge myself a new man were slowly stripped away by unbound fury. I'd nearly turned on Salen once or twice, letting my anger get the better of me. I was becoming a hateful person. All the death, the loss, and the blood-bound glory all began coming to a head. I was relapsing. Over this time I began to know Salen more and more, however, and she regaled me of her past, equally if not more so tragic than mine. We shared the common bond in that, to wayward, tortured souls seeking vengeance. I'd hoped Nef would be alive, briefly, but soon enough I began to accept the fact she was likely dead. I accepted it, and took it into my heart, molding it into a weapon. In that same span of time I was suddenly confronted by Salen, and she asked something of me that trend me deeper than any sword or spell had. She asked to ally with her and give her a child, as repayment for my lashing out at her so violently prior, something I'd desperately striven to atone for. I'd be someone worth revilement, surely, but I agreed. She made me promise something, oddly enough. She made me promise that, if I couldn't exact my revenge, that I had to let go, and leave it in the past rather than letting it destroy me, as it had destroyed her. I told her I would, if she would too. Somewhere along the way, however, I lost Salen. We'd been separated for a time, and I assumed her captured by the ones we pursued. I left to Ashen Vale, bringing with me a force to be reckoned with. At my side stood MFFRRGH, who was in fact Mokfar, my greatest friend of old, risen again in undeath. Yet still, Lairway, my old teacher the Flame Witch. At camp I projected myself far off, contacting Leaf and Stormwind. I urged her to go to the Thornton's cave, to retrieve my things for me, a simple gesture. But, as she arrived they took her hostage, revealing their FEL-tainted, vile intent. I wished nothing more than to open a rift to Westfall, to save her, but the end of my quest was so close. Each of my parties suffered in our days, and now, with my two allies rallied at my back I marched on a fire-scar shrine, intending to confront the cult and end the arduous conflict. It began to rain, and I could feel something crawling up my spine. It was a palpable feeling. I was going to find the truth, save Nef and Salen, kill their captors, then return to the kingdoms, and strike down the Thorntons for dealing me a blow in such a dire time. We snuck into the ruin, a handful of local night elves, at our backs as reinforcements. Among them most prominently Caloris, a high-born abjurer. The cultists spotted us rather than attack. They beckoned us forward with open arms, urging us to return with them through a portal to their hideout. We cautiously accepted, ready at a moment's notice to spring forth and cut them down. Through the portal we saw a dark den tainted by dark magics. Lead onward we came upon an open area, tread across a bridge, and then halted. Before us was a throne, and an obelisk. Upon the obelisk Nef's corpse was strung up, her stomach cleaved open. My heart sunk, as it had so many times before. I was about to strike out, but I stopped. Silene was revealed, bound and gagged. One cultist called forth, beckoning their Hierophant, their aforementioned leader. Silene was suddenly untied, and led to the throne, her throne. A veil had been clasped over my eyes the entire time. The one I sought to kill most through my wearing journey was at my back the entire time, someone I'd grown to trust so closely. She spoke loud, beckoning me to join her, and cut down my misbegotten companions. I was to take my place at her side, and bask in glory. My mind began to race, and my hands began to shake. I was coming undone at the seams. Something took hold then, something dark buried deep in my subconscious, patching me back together if only briefly. I gave the order. Kill them. We began hacking down the filthy, reviling fiends mercilessly, my own hands showing a brutality I'd never seen prior. The Hierophant was struck by an arrow, weakly clambering away as he worked toward her, running through each of her minions. The lesser cultists had all fled, the satyr our only resistance. We slew them without hesitation, and soon enough the dust settled. Each of them were dead, all except Salen, whom I rushed to. She was breathing, yet close to death. I drew my dagger, intending to slit my hand and heal her with the feat of hemomancy. Yet, my companions thought my intention was to execute her. They forced me back, shouting about how she needed to face justice at the hands of the Caldogrite, the ones she wronged the most. I broke free of my bonds and suddenly tapped into the bracelet, the same one I was gifted so long ago. I let the floodgates open, its power flowing deeply into me, gnarling me in mere seconds. I gave Muck for his own order, to kill. He joined me at my side, and, as he placed a hand at my back, I felt a sudden, immeasurable surge. The artifact that drove Muck from aid so long ago was embedded in his unliving chest, and now it was channeled through me. My eyes were alight with an arcane fire, and from my hands burst forth my most powerful evocations, spewing them like common fire bolts. I nearly killed all of them for even daring to keep me from her. I was going to take her under my wing and rehabilitate her, raise her up from the madness she'd so firmly been entwined in. No, notion itself was sheer madness, in retrospect. She was beyond saving, and deserved only death. They were right, but I just kept fighting, heaving up the stone. Beneath us, the entire cavern beginning to collapse. My reach had far extended my grasp, and a malicious intent overcame me wholly. Lairway, in desperation, lunged at me, tapping my monarch. I was sapped, largely, a portion of that massive corruption imparted to her. She failed to take everything, however, and I was left with an inkling of power. In that moment, however, I realized it was too late. Silene was dead, and with her, our child. I collapsed before my fallen teacher, whose breathing had become thin. I whisked Mokfer and Learway away. As Weary appeared, I slit my hand, my blood spilling forth in earnest, as I weaved empowered hemomancy, expending the last bits of mana in me to save her life. I fell over after, leaning against her ruin, as I curled up and softly sobbed. Learway awoke after, and berated me, lingering on the prospect of killing me. Her eyes were alight with a purple glow, and she too shared in the all-encompassing arcane corruption that stemmed from the dual artifacts. She left. There I was with Mokfer, slowly roaming Fellwood, dragging our feet. I came across a group of satyr, among them 2 elders and 2 younglings. My rage spilled forth like wildfire suddenly, and I cut down the eldest 2 without a hint of hesitation. With a sick, devilish grin I ordered the younglings to fight to the death, promising the victor to go home free. One was more cunning than the other, and so it was. I could not linger there for long, as my thoughts roamed to leaf. I had ruined so many people's lives, including my own, but hers was not yet done. I tore a rift to Deadwind, leaving Mokfer to wait. Suddenly Caloris burst from the portal behind me, and demanded I hand over the bracelet, knowing very well its destructive, volatile properties, and that it should be handled by someone more careful than I. We had wizard's duel, but in the end I was the victor. I tied him up and toted him along in tow. I spoke with such hatred, then, belittling the highborn. I spoke of how my people had sprung up to glory in such a short span, while his scurried in the mud, twiddling their thumbs for 10 millennia. Wasted words. I projected myself to Celsi Thornton's presence, and we agreed upon a trade. My elf, for her half-elf. We met in Duskwood, and so it was. The exchange was made. I know not what happened to Caloris. With Leaf safe I pondered leaving her in Stormwind, then taking a very long walk off a short cliff. It wasn't so. Fate had other plans for me. A sentinel, Jelena, found me. She took me under custody by writ of the Grand Alliance, as I was to be brought to Ashenvale to debrief the warden on what had happened. It took every ounce of willpower to fight back the gnawing, scratching voices, the ceaseless shouting in my mind telling me to lash out and kill her. Something came to me in the night, before we were to leave to Kalimdor. I saw an image of a man locked away in an old tower, and a voice came with it. It was my brother. At first I thought it was merely a hallucination, like the many images of Neef and others, that pestered me through the day due to my corruption. Yet, this was real. I knew it, so I urged Jelena, and we left to the northern reaches of Deadwind. We trekked a winding, treacherous path, stopping where I'd been instructed to go. We waited and waited. Suddenly a portal was wrenched open. I was not led astray after all. We waltzed in and tread along dusty corridor full of inactive arcane constructs of varying sizes. I threw open the door before us, and we came out into an open room. On one end stood a behemoth construct, wires laid across the floor, connecting it to the other end, where crippled Kyle knelt. I was taken aback at first, but quickly jumped down, rushing toward my brother's side. He looked up, and with a mere gleam of his violet-hued eye he froze me in my tracks. I inquired of his intent, my brother. He told me he thought he could slink away, and ignore the arcane illness which degraded him, so he thought he could weave an illusionary world of his own where he could live in peace. He spoke about how the Xaviers, if only they'd never been born, the world would be better off. He said for all the things we'd done, the destruction we'd wrought within and beyond the Grey Main Wall was never worth the good that came with it. He knew I killed Sarah from that supposed echo of Kyle I confessed to months prior. He once saw me a model of glory, an older brother, to look up to, one that inspired him to act the same, something he never quite found naturally. Now we stood against each other, at odds. This was no sibling rivalry, no, this was the product of a misbegotten world, and two brothers lead astray by its maddening hand. The Xavier family line came down to this moment, a moment of reckoning, and a moment of truth. In my arcane-ailed state I struggled to mutter words of reason, to talk him down from his madness. I mustered an anger equal to his madness, and soon the behemoth construct moved against me. An epic battle unfolded, my evocation against his illusion and arcane puppetry. We tore that tower asunder, debris crashing to and fro as the foundations rumbled. At the last moment I severed his connection to the giant, and in one last desperate arcane feat I whisked us three away. Jelena took my bracelet from me in my weakened state and cast it into a nearby lake, as I cursed her. We tread the long path back to Stormwind, I with a broken leg and a broken mind, Kyle with a broken body, and Jelena with a determination to see her mission through. The priesthood at the Church of the Holy Light would mend us, Jelena said. I struggled against the prospect, but the Kaldorei subdued me as I blacked out. I awoke, likely sometime later, to a white-hot pain washing over me. It was unlike anything I'd known before, totally numbing, blinding, and all-encompassing. My body had been plunged so near to the edge, near to total destruction, and now the light was pulling me back inch by inch. I writhed, struggled, and screamed in agony, the process dragging on and on. In the wake of it I collapsed again, only to awake on a boat days later bound for Darnassus. Kyle had left us before we reached Stormwind, I'd come to find. Without the corruption I saw clarity. I saw the wretched road I'd begun following after the cult's den. I searched my mind so desperately for some answer, something to make sense of it all. My world had been destroyed and rebuilt so many times, my hopes and dreams astray, and regained time and time again. On that long trip to Darnassus I did nothing but think, reevaluating my life. No, I screamed aloud in my cabin. No, I'd not let it destroy me, and Xavier is never left behind. Yet all my family had gone, and left me living, as they either died or abandoned me. I couldn't let that destroy me. I let it all soak in and harden like armor. I debriefed the warden of my quest, what had transpired, and what I'd done. I conveniently left out the bit about Caloris, and I was let free. I left, tore open a portal to Hillsbrad, and trekked back to that old, accursed estate of my uncle's yet again. I lied down in the bunk Kyle had been using, as he rebuilt it, and I rested. I rested for months, living simply and blankly. It was a rest I desperately needed. One morning when I awoke, rather than lounge I took to my old gear, donning it, and setting out. First to Deadwind, to retrieve my most accursed and prized possession, the corrupting bracelet, and then moved onward. The world has need of heroes from all walks of life. Yet, I'd like to think the rabble bunch of adventurers leading the fight are better off with my aid. I bring with me Tome and spell, staff, and sword. That's not all, however. I bring with me a shade of each person I've lost, and each person I've wronged. I am haunted, images nipping at my heels, ushering me to push through the forces of darkness so eagerly engulfing the world. Do not take my words for a fool's ignorance. I am not a good man, no, but I fight for a good cause, and maybe, just maybe, when I finally die I'll leave this world better off in the face of it all. Or, at least find balance and leave this plane, as it would have been without my ramponer. I am Renault Xavier II of Stormwind, once of Gilneas, then of Dalaran, born into a lineage of nobility, and then thrust into a world I was hardly ready for, and it I for all my trials. I fancy myself a simple, yet somewhat ironic and meaningless so far as actual prestige went. Renault the Blue, a rogue archmage of the hedge. Some time later, Renault the Blue. Was I always that self-absorbed? Though, I admit it's almost refreshing looking back on how I viewed my life then, if a bit cringeworthy. Heroes, trials, a rough upbringing to a transient life, leading to what? To take a page out of my own book and quote myself, as I once spoke to a friend, to what end does it bring us? I thought I could absolve myself, and solve the world of its problems, and took the quest, yet beyond all my humble beckons and thoughts of redemption, truth, the real truth. The kind that's hard fought, lying in the muck and shite of the world, buried deep in what we discard. I dug beneath my own unmentionables, and found my own truth. My old reflections were an incomplete picture of a greater mural. I believed every word I put to ink, fancying a simple title to face a world that was everything but. Despite this, I'd find the time passing not as a babbling brook, but a rushing tide. The stream that batters the landscape and molds riverbed from strong-facing rock. How will this mural shape? A masterwork or a fool's errand? As always, I was conflicted. The long-standing weight of Sarah's death upon my shoulders had been lifted, if only somewhat. The Fellwood incident left me shaken to my core. My alignment shifted. My brother had hidden from me and let me think him a dead man, tried to kill me, entered the world of our corruption. My old friend Mockfrey had clarity, no longer a meager geist, yet evil all the same. My skills were, as always, growing. I was no meager conman using illusions to dupe peasant folk. I was a powerhouse of magical power in my own right, that, coupled with a growing need to aid the world in the throes of the cataclysm, all lead me to a decision. Hull. The campaign to strike at the very Firelands itself was being staged, and the entire mountain was engulfed in flames and strife. It was a terrible war, and I set off to do my part yet again. Upon reaching the front lines I was met with a grim sight. Once beautiful elven forests charred to ash. Old homes lied in ruin, the memories of those that lived in the mountain's shadow flashing before my eyes. I was taken aback. Despite the weight of Hull's state, it was not all grim. I was reunited with someone I had thought I'd never see again. Somewhere in the elven lands I ran across the path of the girl who'd been my best friend and cohort in my youth. My sister, Ophelia. A rush traveled through me, a feeling I scarce had. Joy. Yet, she was not the carefree soul I once knew. Just as I had been, she was touched by her journeys, molded by them. The fall of Gilneas did no favors for her, ingraining a deep hatred for Wergenkind. There was an eerie tension in the air, as I considered talking her down from her crusade. Yet, I did not. After some time we parted ways, and I trekked further up the mountain. More reunions were abound, familiar faces such as Jareth and Mockfrey showing themselves. Mockfrey had found some semblance of peace with his own life, it seemed, aligning himself with the forces of good. We had to merry time roaming the charred countryside, slaying fiery beasts, and collecting enchanting reagents in our off time, and trekked into dangerous molten regions when summoned to aid in the core missions of the campaign. It was right around then that I was approached by a girl. At first, she came to me in my mind. I thought her a hallucination, yet, finally she came to me, a frail, forsaken woman. She had an oddly quaint, trustworthy air about her, and so I listened. Karina. She revealed to me she was an agent of a certain, obscure sorcerer. One who wished to speak with me about the cult that I had toppled during the Fellwood incident. I was intrigued, and briefly left the front lines. Returning to Ashen Vale, I met with the supposed sorcerer, another undead. Yet this one was the opposite of the messenger. He had an eerie, mysterious air about him. He stood upon an old cult site, with dozens of corpses of misbegotten worshippers surrounding him. The smell was foul, evil, even. It was a grotesque scene, yet I heeded his call regardless of the carnage about us. It was revealed that he had called upon me to ask for my aid in cleaning up the remnants of the cult Salen had led. I wished with every fiber of my being to be done with such matters, and go back to my simple quest of fighting fire elementals day in and day out, yet I knew deep down that such seeds could take root and grow back into its former, gnarled power. The cult could not be allowed to reform. And so I submitted myself to be his sword, to strike out at the last remaining bits of the monster I had slain prior. I toted Karina in my company, and we trekked on. The next few weeks were a blur, yet I know I nearly found myself being made a tool of corruption once more. The sorcerer manipulated me and led me down a dark, yet brief path. I worked the situation to my own gain, however. Upon realizing Karina was a slave to him, I bargained a deal to set her soul free before finishing off the cult's last few according to my own plan, rather than his. He was displeased when I confronted him after, but he did not attack me. Instead, he embedded seeds of doubt in my mind, suggesting that one day I would be, as he was, an unliving shadow, shifting through the far corners of the world, feeding on the torment of others. Would I? With thoughts of the Fellwood incident, and the cult finally shut from my mind, I left Ashenvale, intent on returning to the good fight. I gained many artifacts in my time fighting alongside the Alliance Horde forces in the Firelands, as well as a good deal of friends. A liner, Odilon, Relic, Drakmar. The latter, I came to realize, was the very same brown-skinned orc who had saved Kyle and myself several months earlier. I furthered my magecraft and my skills as an enchanter. It was needed after all, since imbuing one's gear with fire resistance was needed to stave off the harsh environment of the Plane of Fire. I had even taken a brief trip to the Void as an odd gnome approached the front lines one day, and pulled several adventurers aside to be teleported off, needed in closing a void portal elsewhere. I gained a scroll of spell fire, and imbued the staff I had received by the king's hand. Sometime during the next few months, Isabella and I stopped being a thing, as she saw me for who I truly was. The fiend I had been. She realized I had been sleeping around and nearly broke my jaw. I guess I deserved it. After the campaign in the Firelands was concluded, I finally left the mountain a honed man, redoubled in power and the will to live, adventure, and fight on. I was intent on returning to Stormwind, but I was sidetracked when a certain rumor passed my ears. Yet again the cult haunted me. Their leader, Salin, the woman who had supposedly been carrying my child, had in fact evaded death. I wasn't privy to how, but I set out immediately, stowing away my Stormwind resurgence. It did not take long to find her using magic, and soon I had eyes on her. We were in neutral, Argent territory. She was in the company of Learway, my old teacher. I had seen her scarcely over the years, and now I was awash in confusion. They were old acquaintances, it seemed, and she was intent on stopping me from saving my revenge. Yet, Salin was heavy with children rather. Twins. They had my blood, and I could not slay her or report her to the Alliance, despite her heinous crimes. We traveled together for a time, an odd trio. I waited until the twins were born, and saw them into the world. I felt something indescribable. A girl and a boy. The former would be named by Salin in remembrance of Nief, and the latter by me after my brother, Nieven and Kyle Brightspear. I was ecstatic, as any father could no doubt tell you. My prior hatred towards Salin was dulled, and though she offered up her life in the wake of their birth, I chose to spare her. I could see in her eyes something I once saw in my own. Regret. I came to realize that she was leader of her group not by will, but instead placed upon her throne by force, lulled by dark magics. Although her actions were done by her hand, it was not without influence. That, coupled with the fact of our children, led me to not only spare her, but to leave them in her safekeeping for a time. My stay with them did not last forever, and so I trekked on, intent on returning often to see them. In the coming days I was reunited with quite a few old faces. Leaf, whose true name I had come to realize was in fact Namilla, had fallen on dire times. She became a drug-addled hoodlum in my absence, something that put me in a dark mood. Was I responsible? Was I truly needed in the Firelands, or should I have kept by her side? Either way, I helped her recover, and even visited Karina on occasion to have oddly cheery talks and form sewing circles. I had also run across the path of the Naga known as Senya, whom I once did unsavory business with. She was no longer the leader of her tribe, now a mere wanderer just as I was. Well, the difference being she was a 20-foot-tall monstrous powerhouse of murder. I was just a man, albeit a powerful sorcerer. She proved good company in moments of clarity, surprisingly. She had even introduced me to another serpent by the name of Cyrano. And so life went on, just a bit less chaotic than usual. That is, until a certain encounter. In visiting Karina one eerie night, I was suddenly accosted by none other than my brother. Kyle came to me acting strangely, saying incoherent things, and stumbling about in passing fits of rage. It wasn't entirely uncharacteristic of him, so I hadn't suspected the turn that'd soon follow. He kept pushing and pushing, pulling my strings perfectly, pushing every button, tugging at every heartstring without her. It was as if he were in my mind, gripping it. A haze fell over me. I had encountered a creature of untold nightmare, something that drove me to madness. I struck, and didn't stop until I was suddenly standing above the beaten corpse of my brother. I was lost to a stupor. And then the beast revealed itself. It was massive, flinging dark magics from its tentacled arms, and stared me down with its faceless visage. I was angry, both at him and myself for even having the potential to murder my own blood. It may have been an illusion, but it shook me to my core all the same. I fought with everything I had, pulling every mighty evocation from my deeper recesses of my mind, and yet we were matched. Before I could deal a decisive blow, he fled to the waters and left me in my ruined state. The coming days were shaky, yet I had Leaf in my company to aid me upon returning to Stormwind. I had steadied her, and so she returned the favor in much the same way. I did occasionally visit Salen and the twins, yet not as much as I'd intended. As always, life had new obstacles to throw at me. Some I had even elected to face myself. I began spreading my wings in the enchanting business, making several contacts. Among them was a Centaur working out of Booty Bay, by the name of Jason. He was quite a character, yet he had an undeniable genius. We would work well together over the next few weeks, toiling away at reforging my pseudo-artifact bracelet into 3 lesser, yet uncorrupted items. The new trio would be stored away, waiting for a time when I could grant them to my greatest allies. We had also worked on a project to craft an advanced form of mage blade with interchangeable crystals, yet it was put to the wayside. Unfortunately, Jace passed away before the project could come to fruition. I continued expanding my new, fledgling business. I had been a crooked businessman several times over, but now I was in it for the long haul. I had to knit together the scraps of my Stormwind reputation and forge a respectable appearance. I began traveling to and fro, mainly from Stormwind City, through Elwyn, down to Booty Bay, and back, occasionally dipping over to neighboring regions as well as visiting a certain noble estate. House Ashai. They were a suspicious bunch, but they paid well and had a great interest in magical goods. I took a liking to several of them, but ultimately I always trekked on their grounds with a bodyguard in tow. That guard being an afflicted gentleman by the name of Frank, a man I'd come to know as a great friend, and a cohort in mischief and adventure. I was also joined by my old friend Relic, who had been apprenticing under me. He may have drifted to and fro, but he had a fair aptitude for magic, and it was refreshing to have a student that actually stuck around. Soon, I made 2 new contacts in the form of Gerard Moulsdale and Drad Halebin. The former was a prestigious businessman in his own right, and the latter my personal career. It was also fated that I'd run across a face I'd not seen since my apprenticeship at Dalaran. Avel Membricion. We were both underbelly tough guys in our youth, hoodlums that were thick as thieves. Literal thieves. Now, however, we were simply fellows trying to make it in the world. We all got along just fine. It was time to build something for myself, something lasting. Both so that I could pursue my own goals and to make a suitable home should I ever need to raise the twins in human lands. Life turned on as mundane as it had been in a long time. It was good to get another rest from the burning countrysides and war-torn lands, grand betrayals, and bloody battles. I forged new relationships, expanded my practice, and just lived. It wouldn't last, however. Every bout of respite I've had has been ripped away by the encroachment of great evil, come to think of it. The Southland stirred. Duskwood was alight, yet again with terrible haunts, unliving beasts, and unimaginable monstrosities. The Lick known as Dirge had been revitalizing his forces, and preparing for some sort of incursion. The dead walked yet again, the only difference this being that Fashkor was nowhere to be seen, Dirge acting as a Salon agent, presumably. I mounted several expeditions into the Darkwoods, striking at Dirge's infrastructure. Yet, despite having stopped a plague hound from entering Elwyn, having defeated a blight worm in single combat, and having crippled his mining operations, I never managed to fell the Lick himself. I nearly died several times, the closest being when I met Dirge in a one-on-one battle. Dirge disappeared back into the shadows, dodging reprimand. At least Elwyn was safe. I was suddenly glad that I had met the beckons of Dirge's trifling. It got me back into the swing of things, and got the magical juices flowing. Light knows I need it, for the final call to arms, to put an end to the cataclysm, as a whole was soon ringing out to all adventurers bold and foolish enough to face the beast himself. Deathwing. We all gathered together, joined under one unified banner. Humans, gnomes, orcs, elves, and so on. What happened next would be an adrenaline-fueled blur. I recall the revving of engines as we approached from the sky to land on the beast's back, carried through by gnomish aircraft. The creature's body lashed out at us, and we made way for the dragon soul to be fired. It rung through the creature, and its very roar cracked across the sky like thunder, something that lurched into the back of my mind and stayed there. Even today I recall it in my nightmares from among the chaos of the battle, a single, deafening boom. He was taken to land, and we struck once more. We had a second wind at our backs, and so we fought tooth and nail. The hard part was over, or so we thought. Despite being run right through, the blasted dragon just got right back up. Not that it wasn't monstrous before, but it became an aspect of horror in its final moments. In the end, the beast was slain before he could get off a final spell and ring the closing bell on our world with his unstable magics. Bezeroth was saved, for the moment at least. I, as many others, recoiled from the fight a changed man. I had suffered many scars over the years, yet the battle of the Dragon Soul was by far the most gruesome. The very blood of the beast was an ooze of molten fury, and amalgamations sprung from its body to whip out in desperation as it fell. It would take quite some time to recover, time I thankfully had. There was a place waiting for me back in Alwyn, just as I had intended. A home. An apprentice. Friends. I receded back into my Stormwind life, yet I felt restless. I was on edge, even more so than I'd ever been. I thirsted for something more than my measly merchant life, meandering through social drama and discourse, like some sort of common folk. I began looking for more threats within Stormwind's borders, since Dirge had all but disappeared. I found a new quest in the form of Redridge Mountains, embroiled in a struggle against a local menace. The orcs had been defeated some time ago, yet gnolls and Ettins still held key positions across the craggy landscape. A lone nobleman stood poised, intent on purging the land of Stormwind's threats. And so I went to him, Lord Drakmor of House Stalbrad, seated at Highridge, granted land in the Southlands, after a northern upbringing in Alterac, one of the few Alterassi of importance that remained loyal to the Alliance. He was a proud man, if a bit suspicious. The rumors of his crusade, however, were steely, and so I signed on. After being inspected by both him and his mage assistant Kelny, he found me worthy, and thus began my stay at Highridge. Right around then my brother finally returned from his newfound seclusion, and we crossed paths deep in the Swamp of Sorrows. It was not a joyful reunion, however. Kyle looked marred, hardened. Not sickly or weak, as he once was. He had been tampered by forces unknown, and had an unwavering drive to slay me, it seemed. His arm had an odd quality to it, some sort of powerful prosthetic. He caught me off guard, and displayed a sudden martial prowess combined with his usual FEL arsenal. It proved to be a very potent offensive one I met head-on, as talking him down fell through. We had a prolonged duel, but I managed to fend him off in the end, destroying his prosthetic limb. He disappeared once more, retreating to loom ominously in the shadows. When I next saw him, he professed ignorance of what happened. He seemingly returned to normal, and despite thorough magical and alchemical testing, we could not discern the root of his lingering malice. As my brother, I accepted him once more. Soon I rose to the rank of court wizard, raising a Velm alongside me to work as an assistant of sorts. Having thoroughly displayed the skills I'd built up over the years, and proved my worth, Drakmor could not deny my usefulness. I came to realize there were unsavory things that went on in those lands, oddities and cruelties alike. Yet, it all went to empower the Alliance's presence in Redridge, and to safeguard the land. And so I turned a blind eye. No, I protected House Stalbrad from prying eyes. Construction began on a mage tower as I went about warding the landscape, forging magical traps and shields that would keep invaders out, as well as keep certain indentured workers in. During this time we began our crusade, striking out at several encampments and concentrations of gnolls. The campaign went smoothly until we reached the latter days of our struggle. The Ettins and gnolls forged a pact and entrenched themselves north of Highridge. We prepared a strike force, and tensions rose. Rumor had it that gnoll sorcerer, a leader of sorts, was puppeteering the Star Coalition. Surely he'd be a worthy foe. I wasn't wrong. The sky crackled and rain began to pour, muddying the battlefield and laying the foundation for a grim scene. We played our hand well, but suffered considerable losses among the rank and file. The gnolls had cannons and giants. We managed to fell them, but not without a cost. During the final push, a certain massive Ettin approached. I could discern it was empowered, yes, but what I hadn't prepared for was a spell to backfire. I fired off a powerful attack that ricocheted back at me, and by a stroke of bad luck my own warding defenses failed to deflect the spell back. I took the full force of it and stumbled back injured. Just then, by some sort of even greater cosmic stroke of bad luck, or perhaps karma, lightning coincidentally struck. It was not aimed at me, it seemed just a vengeful act of nature. It arced right down toward me, passing through my body non-lethally, yet sending me into a critical state instantaneously. I felt pure agony rip through my very core. It was as if the universe was out to get me. I did not see a long, winding tunnel with a brilliant light at the end. No, I saw a blur of images and memories instead. My life rolled through my mind's eye like a gnomish picture book, flashes of both those who would mourn me and those who would not. Then I drifted in a void of nothing, only to suddenly feel a brief prod, the presence of relics seeking my subdued, comatose mind. He was trying to speak to me, yet his words came muffled and jumbled. He slowly faded, and some time later I came to. I took in a sharp, deep breath and peered around the room. There they were, my dear friends and allies. Kyle, Relic, and others. I had not died and gone to paradise, however, as they were merely keeping me company in a most dire time. They had somehow jarred me from what I came to realize was a long slumber, one they feared was permanent. I survived. Things were already tense, yet now I had Kyle to watch over once more. Memories of Deathwing's roar lingering in my mind, images of what I'd experienced on the cusp of death on that rainy night roaming my thoughts. I was growing rapidly in power and standing. I had amassed a vastness of knowledge during my journeys, yet now with access to Stormwind libraries and official contacts I continued bolstering myself. I began reaching my new heights just as I had in the past, yet this time bereft of corruptive artifacts and dark founts of power to siphon. I was reaching my apex, I could feel it. Just one more push, one more arcane epiphany. I worked tirelessly, rushing along the construction of the Mage Tower using my magics, thirsty to see the project complete. I had personally drawn up the plans, and they included a building-wide arcane focus that would allow a mage to utilize the tower to fire projectiles, just like mage towers utilized in the old wars. It also had a preternatural, piercing gaze in order to keep watch over any and all subjects of hierarchy, like a looming eye. Emboldened and self-absorbed, I took Kyle on as a licensed warlock and counsel attaché to my position as court wizard. Drachmo was increasingly pleased with my work as I sought to rebuild my image after falling in combat. We had won the battle despite my stroke of bad luck, yet it tarnished me. It was a time of great change. I had even reconciled with an old, unsavory contact, Celsi Thornton. She was a sharp contrast to her once marred image, now an uncorrupted warlock. I had her screened and brought her into the fold as well, electing her to a similar position to my brother. All was well as we grew our forces bided our time. It was then that the epiphany finally struck me. I was going to forge myself a new, better staff, one befitting my title and strength, both of which I had become increasingly obsessed with. An empowered, prismatic artifact. Avelm and I set out on intermittent treks to gather the necessary materials, felling many exotic beasts and plumbing dark corners of Azeroth. That is how my path collided with another adventurer, a woman by the name of Linnella. She had endured much, and she wore that fact in a gaze I easily recognized. I suppose I always had an attraction to those who were cracked or damaged just as I was. There was a certain camaraderie to be had in rough company, those who've pushed on through Azeroth's hardships. She began visiting me at Hyrage often, treating it as a home of sorts, coming to and fro as she studied runic magics under a certain noble woman. Isabel Corvus was her name, a master smith, or so I had heard. I would need her help soon enough. My plans were coming to fruition. I finally met Isabel face to face through Linnella and discussed at length my plans to craft my masterwork. She would forge the physical components of the staff, while all the while myself and my magical cohorts imbue the raw, churning materials with prismatic power as they took shape. And so, one fateful eve we arrived with our alloted reagents, my payment for her in hand. Avelm, Wolfgang, and Bertram all stood beside me, empowering me as I began the enchanting process alongside Isabel's smithing. Piece by piece the staff came together, each component meticulously and thoroughly wrought in magics, formed by the hands of a senior smith in her craft, possessing steady, steely hands. Finally it was complete, gleaming brilliantly in the forge light as magic churned around the affixed crystal tip. The time for preparation was soon over. Just as I expected, my new dark-casting allies aided House Stalbrad in the coming days, as we sought an end to the Redridge campaign, piercing the heart of the Null forces, as we set our eyes on our final objective, Stonewatch Keep. We were ready, surely. Avelm, Kyle, Celsi, and the assorted others we had hired on in a smaller capacity were all poised. I arrived on the front lines and was met with a steel Draknor, upon a garnished throne, overlooking the battlefield. Stonewatch was close, just out of cannon range. We had been shelling the outer fringes of their defenses for some time, and now was the time to end it. We were joined by a handful of Nulls led by one named Aaron, who opposed the Pack's decision to poke the sleeping beast, that is Stormwind, provoking one of the lion's claws to strike House Stalbrad. Once more rain began to fall, a perfectly gritty backdrop framing the upcoming fray. We teleported to Stonewatch's flank as others assaulted from the front. A cacophony of screams, war cries, clashing shields, and spells rose up, and blood was shed. Stalbrad forces spearheaded through the Null defenses, suffering casualties. I summoned a small force of elementals, and with my allies at my sides we dug into their flank. Just as our assault truly began, however, Celsi began coalescing something deep, dark, terrible. The eldritch components of her incantation alarmed me, yet I was too late. The air in the inner courtyard shimmered with a sudden burst of demonic magic, her rift tearing open a webway for a gigantic Anahelan. Its voice cracked out, pealing over the land like thunder. It proclaimed promises of legion invasion, its shackles quickly broken, as it ceased heeding Celsi's commands, and began errantly destroying everything in its wake. It killed many of the Nulls, but some of our troops were caught in the crossfire, as well as the keep itself. Terrible destruction was wrought before she could banish it. My mind, just the same as Stonewatch Keep, was racked. This would be a debacle. What we strived so long for now lied in a deeper ruin, and when the Nulls had taken up residence, what would become of me, the man who let this happen under my supervision? The appearance of such a demon would end me, and what I had built. Yet again I had trusted, and yet again I was led to ruin. There was no other choice but to detain her, and await some sort of order, to be forged from the chaos of the day. She resisted, however, and fought tooth and nail. I could not guarantee her safety, nor would I if I could. The tower was nearly torn asunder, as we fought, Grandcasters hurling spells of might with wild abandon. Infernals and demons clashed with arcane guardians, and summoned elementals, as we jabbed back and forth. Ultimately she fled, and I took the reins of the damaged tower. It was still functional, and so I yanked at the cords of the focusing orb. The eye that loomed over the tower flickered open, and I charged a massive blast of arcane energies. Firing it off, it seemed to strike her. I couldn't tell in the following explosion of magic, but there was no trace of her in the wake of the duel. She had either fled and survived, or was disintegrated. The latter I found unlikely in my increasingly paranoid state, and so I receded to the estate to debrief with Lord Drakmor. He did not cast me out, thankfully. Instead he spearheaded the search for Celsi and suppressed knowledge of my misjudgment. I was safeguarded, for now. However, threats still loomed. I figured Celsi must have been following some dark agenda, and began receding more and more into my own mind, looming in solitude upon the perch beside my tower. I stared out over the estate blankly at times, scheming. Upon the completion of the Redridge campaign, Drakmor needed to tend to important matters abroad, and so he left Highridge in my care. To my surprise and confusion, he elected me to house steward in his wake, departing. I continued cooking up my plans and schemes, working alongside Avelm and other magi to push progress in several fields, including pocket dimensions and advanced mage blades, the old project of Jace's that never came to fruition. The tower was under repair, and we made preparations to open it as a magical epicenter of Redridge, for elite magi to be trained and knowledge to be shared for the Alliance's sake. I began to piece things back together, bit by bit. Lanella's company aided me a great deal, yet I did not truly trust anyone. All except for my brother. I kept him on as my counsel attaché, and a portion of Celsi's books as well as my own went to him, stored away in his den. I also entrusted a certain dark artifact that came my way to him, coupled with one of the 3 reforged bracelets, with the third going to Avelm, of course. I soon began enacting my newest schemes in secret, using old, obscure contacts to begin chartering a ship. There was something I needed to seek. Something I... What? Where? Why? Where was I? I saw a cold, bloodied floor, beneath me lurking, glowing eyes in the dark. I could hear rattling, metal clattering, chittering, screams. Had I died in my sleep? Was this my eternal punishment? Everything became a blur, just as it had in the past, when my mind shot itself from Great O. Yet it was different. A mural. Yes, a mural. Streaks of red and gray put to parchment. I saw no, impossible. Images scattered through my conscious, as if a sword that had run straight through me. I felt as if I had been torn from my body and cast into some sort of purgatory. The demons, yes, it had to be them. They knew I was onto them. They must have locked me in one of their cells, made me their plaything. The roaming eyes must have been emerald globes. The clattering, no doubt, fell stalkers lurking. There's no other explanation but madness. I'm not mad. I'm not mad. Yet, here I am talking to you. You don't exist, do you? The invisible earpiece I whisper to in my darkest days, rambling on and on about my deeds and my praises. Perhaps I am mad. There's only one way to find out. I need to piece it all together. It's fallen apart, the mural is shattered. I need help.